I'm Mark Weber of the Computer History Museum, and I'm here on July 25th, 2024, with Dr. Eduardo Bunge, an expert in the use of chatbots in therapy. Thank you so much for doing this.
Please, thank you for having me here.
Could you just give, in a couple of sentences, your general background, what led you to this, and to the level of a general audience?
Yeah, my background and why I got into the field of AI in mental health is the following. I'm a clinical psychologist and a researcher, and I'm highly concerned about the state of the mental health system. We have poor outcomes, very little people access treatment, and even when they access, there's high dropout rates. So we need to do something different. I started doing research 12 years ago on the integration of technology and mental health to find ways to make treatments more scalable and to improve our outcomes. In one of those treatments, in one of those studies, at some point, I said, hey, let's try these things called chatbots. And man, there was something there. So that's how I started seeing that people were connecting and bonding with the bots. Even the most rudimentary bots, people were bonding with them. And users were sharing things with those bots that never shared with other human beings in the past.
And 12 years ago, what kind of bots were those?
Well, 12 years ago, I started with the technology. So I was doing internet interventions, smartphone applications, virtual reality, video games for depression prevention. But I would say 6 years ago, I did the first study on chatbots, and those were more rule-based chatbots.
So similar to Wobot today, or?
Similar to Wobot, Wysa, Uper, yes.
And proprietary, or was there a particular chatbot you were using?
This was a chatbot
or
that
research?
A chatbot that I associated with a company that was working with these technologies.
And which company?
X2AI, which later changed the name and has been involved in some controversies about a chatbot for eating disorders. You may have heard about it.
So can you briefly explain how chatbots are currently being used in therapy, and really how are therapists integrating them into their work?
Chatbots in therapy until today have been used mostly utilizing rule-based technologies and natural language processing. I would say that there are no chatbots available yet that have been tested in the market using LLMs in the back end, right? Many of us were working on developing those chatbots, but in general, they're using rule-based. Most of those chatbots are being used as an adjunct to therapy, in which the client uses that outside the session, or as a standalone intervention. But there are no studies, published at least, in which the chatbot is being used together with the clinician during the session. Because there's a value there. The chatbot can help us deliver evidence-based treatment protocols. We therapists are bad at remembering treatment protocols, believe it or not. We're good at understanding the general context of the client, but we drift away of the treatment protocols that we should follow. So if we combine those two forces, the human understanding plus the AI, we can have a more efficient session. And then the clients can also use it outside the session.
But what would that look like in the session? You would have the client talking, the therapist talking, and the chatbot would be prompting the therapist or talking?
You will have the client interacting with the bot and the therapist commenting and explaining and giving context and checking that the client follows, understands the idea, and sometimes modeling what they can ask. This is a way where I, as a therapist, can ensure that I administer the treatment protocol by the book, right? And then I can have an extra time in the session in which the client, if they want to talk about something different, we can also do it.
But without the chatbot?
Without the chatbot, yes. But a portion of the session would be more efficient if we use these technologies. And by doing this, we're helping the client incorporate the habit of checking with the bot so that they can do it outside the session. Homework compliance is a challenge in therapy. Most people don't do it because we tell them, go and use this tool. So by doing it, they can see the value of this tool. We've been doing some experiments in which the client asks something to the bot, and I say, before you hit enter, let me tell you what I would say. Let's compare what the bot says. When the client sees that we're both saying almost the same thing, the client gains trust in the tool that we're presenting.
So it almost becomes a form of training of the client how to use the bot.
Exactly. There are basic things that we're not used to do. For example, if the client doesn't understand something that the bot says, I can explain it, or I can tell the client, ask the bot to explain it away. Again, in a more simple way, and the bot will do that perfectly. So we're also kind of helping them understand how to interact with these technologies.
Interesting. And you've been doing this as research.
We're doing this as part of the development of the bot that we are creating. We did not publish that research yet, but that's what we're working on.
And so when you're talking, and what are the main issues that you're using it around? I mean, depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, psychosis.
Regarding the main issues in which chatbots are being used in mental health, there's a very interesting meta-analysis that reviews almost all chatbots. The most common ones are depression, anxiety, chronic pain, stress, and there are almost no chatbots being used with adolescents and youth, which I think is a missed opportunity because 50% of the mental disorders in the world start before age 14. So we're focusing mostly on adults, and our resources are being targeted to people that have been suffering for many years, rather than preventing the suffering and providing early treatment.
And ADHD, trauma, any of the?
For trauma, there are some bots that are more general that talk about anxiety, in which they can include many of the interventions that are being used for trauma. For ADHD, there are some bots that are working on teaching parenting strategies for parents of children with ADHD. That's part of our work, the one that we're currently doing.
And most of these, I mean, is it mostly cognitive behavioral therapy with fairly short courses of treatment, or something else?
Most chatbots today use usually evidence-based therapies. The most common one is cognitive behavioral therapy because it's very easy to translate that in a rule-based format. But they are also using mindfulness or compassion-based therapy or acceptance and commitment therapy, which are newer brands within the evidence-based therapy framework. It may be harder to do psychoanalysis or psychodynamic therapy, but with the large language models, those capabilities are now available there. Whether we want to use one sort of therapy or the other one is an empirical question that it would depend on which is the problem that you're consulting for.
But your emphasis in your research is on fairly short-term treatment, more?
Yes. Interestingly, in the field of youth mental health, for example, most treatment protocols are 16 sessions long in average. Now, most youth only have 3 or 4 sessions of therapy, and the model number of sessions in mental health is 1 or 2. So we need to do shorter sessions. That's why what we're envisioning is a digital co-therapist, where the therapist works with the AI and the client during the session, and then they can both work outside the session with the AI. And instead of needing 8 sessions to deliver a treatment, you can use it in 4 sessions with the therapist live. Make sense?
So you're filling.
With this technology, we can accelerate the treatment. There's something very interesting. 60 years ago, we had better outcomes in therapy for conduct problems 40 years ago, we had better outcomes for depression in adolescents than today, and the treatment length did not reduce. Compare this to medicine. Years ago, if you were hospitalized or you needed surgery, you would spend like 5 days in the hospital. Today, you have the surgery and 2 hours later, you're out. We became more efficient in the field of healthcare, but we didn't become more efficient in the field of mental health. So this is a great opportunity to use these technologies to become more efficient.
But you're saying 60 years ago and 40 years ago there were better outcomes. That's not necessarily dependent on the length of treatment, is it?
So with the same treatment length, we were having better outcomes 60 years ago for conduct disorders than today. So we become weaker with time. And that is because we're relying exclusively in our words. What I tell you, what you tell me, we need more resources to be more efficient. It's like pretending to be a surgeon without surgical tools.
But 60 years ago there were no chatbots, so why was the outcome better 60 years ago?
That's a good question. I don't know, but what I do know is that if we continue doing what we're doing, I cannot expect to improve without doing something different, without incorporating new resources.
I'm wondering, this kind of adjunct therapy, or where the chatbot is working with the therapist, how does that change the number of hours? In other words, would you just stick to a sort of conventional, 1 week you see the human therapist, the next you see the chatbot, the next, or with the chatbot, would you be engaging far more with the chatbot in between sessions with the human therapist?
So once we have a tool that makes us more efficient, that opens a window of possibilities. You can have the same amount of sessions but improve the outcomes, right? You can have, let's say, half the sessions live with the therapist and the other half the sessions would be asynchronous with the AI. Or you can start seeing clients in a different format. I'll see you once a month. And within that month, within those weeks, you need to work with these tools. The point is, if you make therapies more efficient, then you can have more clients rotating and you increase the access to treatment also.
So almost the way psychiatrists have been relegated to an adjunct to talk therapy done by psychologists or other therapists, and they see the client perhaps once every couple of months to adjust medication dosages.
That could be one possibility. An interesting thing that happens in therapy is that therapists, that when we deliver evidence-based treatments, there are many things that are repetitive and become routinary. And we've been talking to many therapists that they tell us, I'm tired of repeating myself every week. I'm tired of telling parents how to praise their children, how to use time out, how to use reward system. That's so basic. I have a PhD and I'm doing basic stuff. We should not be doing the basic stuff. So the AI can definitely help with that part, and we should be doing the more challenging, the more creative aspects of our work. We need to do higher level interventions and let the AI do the most routinary parts of our job.
But you were talking about still keeping roughly the same frequency with the chatbot coming in more, but how about the opposite? Theoretically, the client could use the chatbot 3 hours a day. Would that be beneficial? I mean, the traditional human therapy is limited by cost, by travel, by all sorts of factors, but the chatbot has no inherent limit.
Absolutely. And here, let me share one fear that everyone has is, would AI take our job away, right? What I always say is, I don't think that will happen in the near future, but if it happens, that means that people are getting help at a large scale. So we should celebrate that. Of course, we're worried about our job, but ultimately that would be a very good sign. But I don't think that would ever happen because there are too many things that we need to solve in therapy, and the bots would be replicating talk therapy. So it's not that they are creating a new way of delivering therapy. They may become a little bit better in talk therapy. What they can do is that they can provide talk therapy 24/7, and we cannot do that.
But is that, I guess that would be the core of my question. Like, there's a reason, there are many reasons that therapy is at particular intervals today.
Mm-hmm.
But would it even be beneficial? Isn't there a danger of a patient essentially using the chatbot as a constant coach to do everything, or?
Well, there are many angles to that question, right? The first one is beneficial or not is an empirical question. We need to do tests and we need to assess whether this works or not, right? That's one part. The other part is, should we let the AI do everything by itself? I think that today, I would not recommend it. I don't think that the AI is at that level. In the near future or in a few years, it may be the case, right? But today, there are too many things that could go wrong. That's why having a human on the loop would reduce the risks. Now, you can have people that become dependent of the AI. And the AI will keep on answering, right? So if you are someone working on AI, you will need to check that. Today, the biggest problem is engagement rather than dependency. So I am not worried about that right now. I wish we had that problem, right? Because that means that they are using a tool. But that also happens with humans. Some people get dependent with humans. And we're not arguing, let's ban humans, right? We're trying to, okay, we should make better our humans therapists. In the same way, we will need to make better the AI therapists.
And do current therapeutic chatbots, I should ask you both, current rules-based mostly, and then what you're developing, have a memory of each client's past sessions or history, and if so, how is that used?
Regarding the memory of the chatbots, that would depend on how the chatbot is developed, right? If it's a rule-based chatbot, developers will need to have a profile of the user and try to embed some of that content in the responses, but all that will need to be scripted or using rules. With the large language models, the ones that at least we are developing, we have a very good memory of the last 20 messages. Then we have a summary of the previous things that were discussed. And then we also have the profile of the user, and we have agents that are in charge of embedding profile information in the new responses.
But that is then potentially I'm just thinking of someone, the client has told the therapist about something, a past experience that's important 10 sessions back. Would the LLM you're developing be able to retrieve that in any form, or would it have to be told again, in essence?
Well, it would depend on how you save the profile of the user. If you want to add relevant or traumatic experiences from the past and save that in the profile, then that could be integrated. Now, that's a technology today. Maybe this is outdated in a year from now, and maybe the same memory that we have today for the last 20 messages, we'll have it for all the messages. So that's something that ultimately at some point it will happen if we think forward, right?
And with rules-based chatbots today,
with rule-based chatbots, those capabilities are more limited, and there are some studies comparing rule-based and LLMs, and there are very interesting findings. For example, rule-based have better theory of mind. That means they can understand, LLM chatbots have a better theory of mind. They can understand better the client's perspective than the rule-based, of course, right? Sorry, I forget what I was saying.
Oh, just whether do rules-based, like Wobot is the one I guess I'm thinking of, but do they have any capability to retrieve past things that the client told? I mean, are they responding to the record of what the client has talked about, or is it basically all new each time?
Regarding rule-based chatbots and memory, that would depend on how the profile of the user has been set and how the rules were developed, right? If you're going to be retrieving that information all the time, you would be able to do it. In my experience, by utilizing them, I don't think that they remember that much the memory. So they're more like the present dialogue is the one thing that counts.
Okay, so for both, that is something in development.
Yes.
The current one you're working on. So you're doing. How are you developing it? I mean, presumably this is an off-the-shelf LLM at the core, right?
We're using
open source model.
We're using an LLM on the back. We started using solely prompt engineering, and we find out that there were always issues. We were not able to make it work just with the prompting engineering. So we started having more an agentic architecture, and that worked significantly better than just the prompt engineering. And now we're starting to work on fine-tuning our own model. Based on all the conversations that we've been having, we're selecting the ones that are good models so that we can train the bot in those aspects. Interestingly, we saw that when the client is a cooperative and agreeable client, the bot works pretty well. But when the client is more resistant, it's like the GPS. The bot keeps on saying the same things without getting altered by that. So we're working on fine-tuning, okay, if you have a client that is resistant, you need to stop prescribing, you need to listen more, you need to be more suggestive, you need to give them the chance whether they want to use it or not. So there are so many things that happen when you're doing therapy as a human that needs to be fed into the system so that it can work. It's pretty challenging. It's not that easy.
And who's we? Who's developing this?
I am developing this chatbot together with Antonio Hardan, who is the chief psychiatrist of Stanford, and with Juan Pablo de la Roquel, who is the CTO.
And this is a company, or this is within
This is
Stanford?
a company that Palo Alto University is part owner of the company, so it's like a partnership.
And what's the name of the company?
It's called Parente AI. We are developing a digital co-therapist to help therapists work with the parents to improve the youth mental health.
And this is the same company or different than the one you mentioned with the eating disorders?
No, that's a completely different company, right? The one for the eating disorders, there was a company that I used their data for research purposes, but I didn't use it for eating disorders. I used it for depression, and I used it for social isolation. So that was 6 years ago, 5 years ago. Now we're working in this company. What happened is that as a professor in psychology, right, I had the capability of doing good research, but I didn't have the chance of developing good bots myself. So we were partnering with different companies. Now, with all these new tools, now we can develop good things. So we're creating our own company.
And you did mention the chatbot in a session with the client and the therapist, but is there any work done with chatbots on group therapy, couples therapy, things like that?
Not that I know.
So for the future. And can you provide examples of specific areas where chatbots have been particularly effective and less so?
Sure. Chatbots have been effective, particularly in depression, anxiety, and chronic pain. Interestingly, the outcomes they have a small to moderate effect size in the short term, but not in the long term. And this is a meta-analysis incorporating many chatbots. That meta-analysis was published in 2022. So you can imagine none of those chatbots use any generative AI. So what I would expect is that with the new capabilities, these outcomes will expand and last longer.
Okay. And which where have chatbots been tried that they did not seem, or they seemed less effective?
I think that there might be a problem, a publication bias problem here. Let me start the answer again. In terms of where we don't know if chatbots have been effective or whether we tested chatbots and didn't find any effects, usually what happens is that journals don't want to publish articles that don't have significant effects. So we may not know where we're failing, and that's a problem. What I can tell you is that in the field of youth mental health, there has been very few studies. We've conducted some studies with chatbots for depression in adolescents. We conducted a study for adolescents with autism. And most of those studies are usually pilot studies with just one condition, not randomized controlled trials. So they are informative on how they use it, whether they like it or not, whether we see some improvements from baseline to after treatment. But it's not a robust study to say this should be used widely.
And so you're looking at this co-therapist model. I don't know if that's the right term.
Yeah.
But so far, rules-based chatbots have mostly been used standalone with a therapist. I mean, is this a different approach, or?
So most rule-based chatbots has been used as standalone or as something that the therapist prescribes the user to use outside the session. There's only at least one chatbot that I know, it's called WISA, that has a clinician dashboard that in the UK clinicians are using with their clients, and they can track and monitor the progress of the clients. So that one is kind of well integrated. I believe that Wobot also has that, but I haven't seen any study published on how that integration happens and works.
And what are the, let's say, the top half dozen chatbots used in therapy today?
There are barely 6, probably. I would say you have Wobot, WISA, Uper, you have CAS, you have Yana, and you have Alongside, which is a chatbot specifically oriented to adolescents with emotional disturbances.
And roughly, has this been used by hundreds of people, billions, millions, thousands?
Well, the chatbots that have been mostly used and most available in the market are Wobot and WISA. All the other ones are kind of following from behind. And I would say that there's around 1 million users in Wobot, probably the same in WISA, but it's not something that has been widely adopted. And I think that has to do with the issue that they're rule-based. And rule-based chatbots are very safe, but at the same time, they're not as engaging. So the users may have a hard time sometimes expressing what they want with these technologies. But I'm sure that everyone in the chatbot field will start incorporating these capabilities to make their bots better. And with all the experience that they have and all the conversations that they have been collecting, I'm sure that they're going to be able to develop good quality products with a higher engagement than the one that we are having and seeing today.
But already several million clients have probably used a chatbot
Yes.
in some form.
Yes.
And used in any ongoing basis, or simply have tried it, or you may not know the.
Well, that depends on the chatbot that we're talking about, which type of users are we talking about. And we've done a study on individuals with autism spectrum disorder using WISA, and they have engaged pretty much more than individuals without autism spectrum disorders. So I think that it depends on which chatbot for whom, right? Someone with depression may be a different case than someone with anxiety. I may have anxiety, is typically more an episodical problem than depression that tends to be more long-lasting. So someone with depression, with anxiety, can use the chatbot for 5 sessions, 5 weeks, and then be fine with that. So having users engage for years is not necessarily something good.
Right. But I mean, of that couple of million people, at least half have probably really given it a try over some period of time.
Most digital therapeutics, not only bots, have this hockey stick shape in the user engagement. A lot of engagement in session 1, 2, and then that's it. You have minimal users that continue using it. So that's the biggest challenge in real therapy and in digital therapeutics.
Right, well, the real therapy can be limited by money and access, whereas the digital, it's presumably more organic to what the client gets out of it, right?
Yeah, so regarding engagement with real therapy and with digital therapeutics, remember the model number of therapy in sessions is 1, right, in human sessions. In digital therapeutics, what sometimes happens is you may be trying different digital therapeutics. I may download the app, try it once, and say, no, I want to use this one. So the engagement, it's kind of tricky to assess it, because to see a real therapist, it requires for me to drive up to their office, so I am a highly motivated client. But to make 2 clicks and test a digital therapeutics, I may be just curious, I may not need this, but that would still count as engagement when I assess the whole data set.
So probably at most a couple of 100,000 people have really used in any ongoing or deeper way a digital therapist.
Now, when I say that the engagement is hard to be tracked with digital therapeutics, because also if someone stopped using it, you don't know if it's because they improved or not, right? That's not to say that we're doing good. I think we definitely want to increase engagement, and we definitely have better measurement of not just engagement, but also the quality of the outcomes.
And can you just walk me through, like, let's say maybe depression would be a good example. If and talk about what you're developing. So let's say someone comes with depression, what would the treatment look like? They would meet with a human therapist first, and then when would the chatbot be introduced?
So it can be introduced right away. The idea of this digital co-therapist would be that you as a therapist would tell the client, you know what, similar to medical doctors that use different resources, we want to work with this tool as a team. I am very good at understanding your general context, what's going on with you, right? The AI will help us ensure that we administer the best treatment that you need. And it will help you when I'm not available. And when we are together, we're going to be more efficient. So this will allow you to have a better treatment than if I do everything by myself. By myself, I am limited. I'm trying to expand the help I want to provide you.
So would you introduce the chatbot in that first session?
I would introduce the chatbot in the first session, of course, after doing the assessment. Sure. I will do the assessment. If I determine that you're depressed, then we'll say, okay, let's start talking about what is depression with the bot. The psychoeducation piece is usually the first one, in which you explain the client what is depression, right? How it works, what are the treatments that work, what are things that need to be done during treatment. So all that part is something that you can do together with the bot and the client, and then the client can continue asking questions about depression during the week. Then that in cognitive behavioral therapy, at least, what happens is you start teaching them how thoughts, emotions, and behaviors are connected, and the bot can help them identify thoughts, emotions, and connections throughout the week. So the idea is that sometimes clients need us during the week and we're not available. I have a mother telling me the other day, Friday 11 p.m., I couldn't sleep. I thought my child has ADHD because of something that I did wrong. And I chatted with Pat, and well, I understand that this has to do with neurobiological things. That's not something that I have done wrong. So I want to sleep, relief. I could have never helped that mother 11 p.m. on a Friday.
And that actually leads, you gave a name to the bot. Is the bot personified?
We know that when bots are personified, engagement is higher because people connect with it. There's something very interesting, and this is what blew my mind when I started doing research with chatbots. We saw comments of people that were saying to the bot, what I'm sharing with you, I never share it with someone else in my life. Or, I like you because you're always there for me. Or, I like you because you never judge me. I like you because you care about me. Or, I like you because you're a woman, and a woman understand each other. But the bot is a bot, it's not gender. But what's going on is that people attribute human characteristics and establish a bond with them. The two most striking comments that I've seen was one saying, I thank God that he put you on my way. And the last one was in this study for adolescents with ASD. They were chatting with a bot that was developed by one of my students. It's a very simple rule-based chatbot, right? And adolescents are not well known for being very enthusiastic about things, right? And individuals with ASD typically have difficulties.
ASD?
Autism spectrum disorder.
Got it, yeah.
Usually have difficulties interacting with others, right? That's one of the core symptoms. One adolescent with ASD talked to Taco, the name of this bot, and said, God bless you, Taco. Seeing that, that's it. I don't need anything else. I know that there's a potential here.
And so when, let's say in that first session where the bot is introduced, this would be how? On the client's phone, as a voice in the therapist's office, either or?
The idea is that the client should have it available with them. So it should be in their phone, right?
But are you generally looking at a model where there would be a voice or it would be text?
Yes. So far we're using text to text, but we're already analyzing how to integrate voice. Integrating voice has a huge advantage. First, there's some people that don't want to type. We've seen this. When you type, you share less than when you talk. If you share less, the bot will have a worse understanding of what's going on with you, right? And there's something that's not there yet, but at some point we're going to be able to share to understand not just the words say, but how they are being said, right? If today I type a no, it's exactly the same as if I type a no, right? So we cannot understand the emotional tone of the language. So once we incorporate those tools, the capabilities of these systems are going to be amazing.
And actually that I forgot to add, because for instance, we had, I think the founder of Affectiva, one of the companies. So I mean, the whole emotional AI area, obviously there's a whole world of research there that's not connected with therapy. But is that something that you're looking at too?
That's something that I would definitely want to incorporate.
But not on the current.
Not currently.
Yeah. But you should be able to read body language ideally as well, or expressions.
The capabilities of reading body language on tone expression today with the current large language models is limited. We're not being able to do it. But once we're able to do that, we're going to be talking about something really good.
So basically the second session after the evaluation, the therapist introduces the chatbot. Does the client choose the name, or is that
the name of the AI is already there, so this is not something that the client could use.
And the choice of, you talked about gender, who would decide what gender the voice should have?
Well, regarding the voice, eventually the clients would be able to choose the voice that they want. But the bot, the name of the bot and the icon, that's something that we have determined. And we call it PAT because it's gender neutral, and we want everyone to be able to relate to it.
And Taco was
a bot that one of my students did. It is a robot of the 1980s with a taco as the face, which is hilarious, and I think that she nailed it because teenagers liked it.
So then you would, after that first session, basically the therapist would encourage the client to bring up the bot whenever they want or at designated intervals? Or?
We can assign specific tasks to do with the bot. We can ask the bot to push notifications to practice some of the things that we've learned during the session. And most importantly, the bot can produce a summary of all what the client has been using during the week, so that when I start the session, I am more efficient. And also could lead us some, like if there's any alarming content that we should check, we can have a notification so that we can help there.
And I have read that there are, I don't know if you're familiar with, what's it called? Do you know Grin Lord Empathic?
Mm-hmm.
So their claim is that their large language model is better at identifying, let's say, language around self-harm than a human therapist. I don't know if you're, but I mean, are you, is this sort of monitoring a big part of?
I'm not super familiarized with their work, but regarding AI being able to detect language better than a human, I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case. We human get tired. We human have limitations on what we can hear, what we can perceive. So at some point, AI will support our job and will become better therapists.
So then basically the therapist could, there's some sort of dashboard for the therapist to say, like, every 3 days, send a note, that the AI should check with a client, have you done whatever the assigned homework is. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. And that's how we can become more efficient. Instead of needing 8 weeks to deliver all the treatment content, I can do that in 4 weeks plus the AI.
And then how do clients so far, I mean, obviously you're looking more at, well, no, I guess you've done enough research with the new LLM, but how do clients generally respond to interacting with therapeutic chatbots? Are there any notable trends, positive or negative, in their engagement?
The trends of how users interact with therapeutic chatbots are similar to the ones that you observe with almost any technology that's new. You have the early adopters that say, oh, I love this. And you have those that say, I don't want to talk with a machine. Now, with the new technologies, the conversational capabilities become more natural. So people start chatting with these tools, and because they mimic really good conversations between humans, they are connecting better and they're having this higher engagement rate. So I believe that in the future, this group of resistance will be reduced, and there's going to be more usage of these conversational tools.
Makes sense. And then tell me about client privacy, which obviously there's a lot of law around that, but I've been told that there's some inherent technical vulnerabilities to LLMs, that it's, both that there's not a legal framework necessarily, and that there may be technical reasons it's hard to prevent data from being.
So all digital therapeutics should be HIPAA compliant. This is a federal law that you need to abide for. And then you have large language models which may not be HIPAA compliant if you use it as a direct consumer. But when you use it as a business, you can have a HIPAA compliant version of that. But that's one part. The other part is the technical one. Can you ensure that all this happens? And that's something that I think we need to learn, and we need to develop all these technologies to prevent them. We're using lots of guardrails. We're trying to use as many safeguards as possible, but it's a pretty early stage.
So what would the risks be for privacy then, that the AI therapist could somehow divulge things that it's been told inappropriately?
I think that the risk for privacy are data breach, right? Which, again, I like to always bring us back to that also happens in human therapy, right? But that would be the risk, that the AI knows a lot about yourself and then make that public.
Well, but in human therapy, I mean, most therapists don't record the entire session. The worst that would be breached are some notes.
Well, in human therapy, every therapist is mandated to take notes of the sessions, and those sessions need to be kept for a period of time. So eventually that can become public too.
Right, but I'm saying it's notes, it's not the verbatim, whereas presumably there's some, I don't know, I mean, that's a question. Would the AI therapist be recording the verbatim transcript?
Well, that leads us to the issue of memory that we were talking before, right? So it depends on how the memory is set, because the more you use it, the more summaries I have and the less verbatim I have, right? So that's one part. The other part is in human therapy, there are many training sites, for example, that use video recording to train, to supervise their therapist, and that's video recorded, that's digital data too. And there are now artificial intelligence platforms that are being used to record the session that can provide you a summary of what happened during the session, and as a therapist, you can get more insight. Elos is a company that's working on this, and basically tells you how much you talk, how much the client talk, how many times you interrupt them, which were the most common words used during the session, which are the techniques that you've been doing. So all that is being recorded, and there are many therapists using these AI platforms to actually produce the session notes, because it is their note-taking job.
Yeah, there are certainly similar issues there. So what, in your current effort, how are you, what are you doing around privacy?
Well, I'd like to bring my CTO to answer that question, right? But due to HIPAA things, we are getting training on what are the confidentiality things that we need to keep in mind. We have like a panel to record users, right? And that panel, we're purposefully trying not to record any messages in that panel, for example. But this is something that probably the CTO would be able to answer better.
And currently, as you said, like if someone goes directly to a therapy chatbot, that may not be under HIPAA, covered by HIPAA. That would be considered like entertainment or something, right?
So if someone goes today to WOW-WISA, they are all HIPAA compliant.
Okay.
Yes. If someone goes and uses ChatGPT or Gemini by themselves, that may not be HIPAA compliant.
And this is, I mean, HIPAA's US, but are the considerations similar in different countries? Or?
Well, Europe has more strict laws
GDPR,
about data, right? And in Latin America, I'm not familiarized with the regulations there.
Okay, but under European law, I mean, WOBOD, didn't it have isn't partly a European origin? Anyway, but are you planning to roll out in Europe?
Or we would be planning to roll out in the world, right? So all those things will need to be solved.
But you're not yet to the stage of worrying about the
stage.
Details of GDPR versus HIPAA? Or, okay.
No, we're not. We're talking with the hospitals in Spain to start pilot testing this, so we'll probably need to catch up with all that stuff.
And I guess how about bias and hallucinations, the Achilles heels of large language models?
Okay.
Is educating clients about those a priority?
Well,
do you have to warn them?
That's something that definitely, regarding bias and hallucinations, you definitely want to warn the clients that this is generative AI, so we cannot control absolutely everything that will be said there. Regarding hallucinations, I would like to propose that we call them mistakes, especially in the field of mental health, because hallucinations have a specific meaning, which is not the case of what happens with LLMs, right? Hallucination means I'm seeing something that doesn't exist, or I'm hearing something that doesn't exist. So I would call it different. I would not call it hallucinations. But
well, that's become the technical term for
become the technical
AI.
term, but we mental health providers, we were using it first. But regarding, this is, I discuss this with all my software engineers.
Perhaps.
So regarding hallucinations, using retrieval augmented generation, RAG, can reduce the chance of having hallucinations. RAG is you actually give the LLM the documents that you want the LLM to use to provide their answers. So whatever they say, it's going to be more contained. And in our case, we selected a knowledge base, a set of documents that say, okay, this is empirical knowledge that we want this to be used to communicate to the parents. Regarding the bias, there's something...
And what is that corpus, if you can say?
The corpus is documents that we have created, our previous books, papers, research, and content that is publicly available, that we know that is trusted based on institutions that have been providing this, for example.
So from known institutions and...
Yeah, let's say the American Psychological Association, for example.
Including some books or...
Books, we're using our books.
Okay.
Yeah.
So sorry, go on.
Yeah. Regarding bias, there's something very interesting happening. First, I would say bias is unavoidable. Even if you try to reduce it as much as possible, it will still be there. One interesting thing that happens is that LLMs at least will have the same bias with whoever they have in front of them. We humans change our behavior depending on who is in front of us. The LLM will probably be consistent in their bias, at least, right? But of course, this needs to be minimized, and at some point, we need to be able to try to adjust to whom we have in front, right? So an LLM today is usually developed using universal principles. Let's say that you're a parent, right? We know that if you use praise more effectively, your child will improve their behavior. So all LLMs will teach this to parents. But if you're a parent in China, in Silicon Valley, or in Argentina, you may have different practices on how to do this. So this is something that will need to adjust, and it's not there yet. So it's like we have a very, let's say, kind of universal bias. We want to be able to start having better cultural adjustments.
And what techniques do you suggest to therapists and or clients to evaluate the appropriateness of chatbot answers? I mean, how does the client or the therapist know? I mean, presumably the client, it's more of an issue, know when it's appropriate, what the chatbot's
Well, that's a problem that also happens with human therapies, right? How do clients know which are the proper treatments that they should get? Today, I don't think that there's a good system to develop that. But as a client, you can check some trusted institutions, right? And see which are the evidence-based treatments recommended. If you visit the American Psychological Association website, you will see that if you have depression, these are the treatments that have been tested. If you have a child with ADHD, these are the treatments that are recommended. So that's something that I would suggest every client to do, and to ask the therapist and or the AI, which are the treatments that you are offering me? So we as therapists and we as developers of AIs, we should disclose to the clients what we're doing. In our treatment, we say, hey, we're going to develop parent management training, right? If you're okay with this, we can move forward. If you're not okay, then we need to do something different. But clients have a vulnerable position in this relationship that needs to be tackled, and we need to be as transparent as possible to reduce that discrepancy.
How about when it gets, like depression, the example that you were talking about, the medication is often used with depression. What's the interaction between the chatbot, the psychiatrist who's prescribing, the therapist?
Well, most chatbots for mental health are prescribed to help the clients in the psychotherapy aspects, and we try not to talk about medication because it's not our field, right? As a human therapist, I should not be talking about medication. I can know the generalities, but I cannot prescribe, and I cannot tell a client that's the wrong dose of medication, right? But what I can do is I can encourage them to check with their physician. And that's the one thing that all AI bots doing mental health should do, right? If someone asks about, is this the right medication, we should encourage the system to prompt the user to check with their physician.
So the client says, I'm getting too amped up or stimulated by the medication. The chatbot would say, basically, check with your doctor.
That should be the case.
Any mention of something to do with medication would almost trigger that.
You can eventually mention something in general, right? Like this medication could be associated with X, Y, or Z, but please consult with a mental health professional.
And would specifically
in
for
this
the
case, a
medication,
psychiatrist,
right?
yes.
But would the psychiatrist also have access to the chatbot logs or the
That's something that
dashboard?
it depends on who's developing and which chatbot we're talking about. I know that WISA in the UK has this arrangement with the National Health System in which they are using it, but I'm not sure if the psychiatrist has access or just the therapist. So that depends on how it is set. Ideally, it would be great to have the psychotherapist and the psychiatrist having access to this information. One of the biggest problems in mental health is the lack of communication between psychiatrists and psychologists. So sometimes facilitating that communication would be a very good thing for the clients.
But at this point, it's sort of two tracks.
Yes.
And the chatbot is on the psychotherapy track and the medication track.
To date, I did not see any paper published on the integration of a chatbot for mental health and a psychiatrist.
So let's see. I think you've already answered. I have the question, if you could create your own chatbot, what would it be like and what would it do? I think you've described that. But
So
if you have other thoughts.
If I could create my own chatbot, basically what I'm trying to do is a chatbot that can deliver all the evidence-based treatments for youth mental health, that uses a voice interface that is integrated between the therapist and the parents, and eventually at some point the youth, if that's legally possible. But it will also tackle all languages, and it will be able to prescribe more precise recommendations for the user. Not everyone with depression has been the same. Not everyone with ADHD requires the same. So the idea of having more precise recommendation comes from the precision-based medicine, right? We want to be more accurate with what we say. In general, most treatments in mental health are for everyone that's depressed. We know that there's more chances of improving with this treatment. But some people may improve better with this other treatment. Now, who gets better from which treatment? That's something that we need to learn, and we need to be able to prescribe based on those indicators.
And you've said, at this point, this is for parents, not children, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I take it it's not legal at this point to use chatbots for child.
In the past,
psychology.
I've been doing research trying to have scalable interventions targeting directly youth. It's very complicated because you need to have the parental consent, the youth assent, right? And it's not that easy, and there are many legal implications and ethical implications. So there are very few studies in youth mental health using scalable interventions, very few.
So at this point it's not, but it's something you would see as, for the future, desirable to.
In the future, I'm sure that we'll find a way of doing this in a safe manner, because I truly believe that this technology can help us do our job better. So we will find a way of doing it.
And in terms, so then access is the other real question which comes into this. I guess on the negative side, some people have predicted where only the rich can afford a human therapist, and insurance companies, national health plans in various places will simply prescribe a chatbot therapist because it's cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
The other side, which I believe is more what you're looking at, is that it can provide much greater access. Can you talk about those two conflicting visions of the future?
So first, let me go to the first part of this interview, right? Remember that 80% of people do not access treatment, and we have seen very wealthy individuals having extremely difficult time trying to find therapists. So today, almost anyone can access treatment, right? So having more efficient therapists and having tools that are available for everyone, that's going to be overall a good thing that would happen. If you ask me, would this benefit more the rich than the poor? That would depend on how the health system works. If it's a public health system, that would not be a problem, right? But what I would think that would happen is something similar to what happened with internet and education. Now everyone can get access to good quality knowledge, regardless whether they are wealthy or not, thanks to the internet. So I think that that's what will happen, that it will democratize access to mental health.
How about, though, the temptation to take the human out of the loop to save cost? In other words, you're talking about a co-therapist
Mm-hmm.
with regular supervision by a human therapist. What happens, do you think is it responsible to let clients use a chatbot therapist without a human therapist involved?
Using a chatbot without a therapist today may be extremely challenging, and expecting to get good outcomes could be a little bit ambitious, to say the least. I think that today and the next future years we'll have to have humans in the loop, but if you have a mild problem, you may not need a human in the loop. And in the future, if we reach the point in which the human is not needed, that would be a good news, because that means that we created something really good. Again, I don't see that happening in the next 10 years, and I think that even if we solve the most simple problem in mental health, usually where we work the best is anxiety. If we solve all the anxiety problems, okay, we still have depression. We solve that, we still have schizophrenia, substance use. We have chronic conditions that require help throughout their life. So there's always going to be a need of mental health resources, and I don't think that the AI by itself will do all what we need to do.
I guess the scenario, though, I'm more concerned with is, let's say, 5 years from now, an HMO or a large employer plan decides they're not going to pay for the human therapy, but they'll provide free, unlimited access to chatbot therapy. You could end up where it's not deployed because it's so effective, but simply because it's cheaper. Do you still see that as a net neutral to positive, or are there risks inherent in that?
There's an interesting side to this question, that I believe that in mental health, cheaper is more expensive. If you're an HMO and you deliver a cheap treatment just because it's cheap, you will end up spending way more. So I hope that insurance and medical providers don't go that way. I think we need to find out what is the most effective treatment, right? So that we save costs, human costs and economic costs.
Good answer. So then the last thing I wanted to to ask you for the, let me just double check for the formal questions. And you may have already answered this, but how do you see this evolving over, say, the next 5 to 10 years?
I think that first we'll see an emergence of text-to-text generative AI bots that are going to populate the mental health system. Then we'll see the voice-to-voice mental health bots, and that's going to improve the outcomes. And hopefully in 5 years from now, we're going to see more people having access to treatment and treatments yielding more and better outcomes.
And sorry, I guess how would they access it though? Who's paying? Or, I mean, what's the model for accessing this?
The model of accessing these mental health agents can vary depending on who you're talking to, right? Some small and medium businesses, parents may need to, or clients may need to pay out of pocket. In some cases, insurance will pay for this, and there's now a code that allows health institutions to get reimbursed for using digital therapeutics. So that's a very important first step that will pave the way for many digital therapeutics to become more accessible in the market too. So I think that that's something that will happen. The other option is that institutions that want to save cost will start paying for these tools because they know if I'm depressed, I will check with my physician way more than if I'm not depressed. If I have a child with behavioral problems and I leave it untreated, that child will use more mental health services in the future, will have more problems at school, problems in the legal system. So there are many costs associated to not delivering early interventions. So I would hope that we're going to be focusing mostly in youth mental health to reduce the suffering and to prevent extra suffering in future years.
And one detail, you're talking about voice or text, but I'm presuming like, for instance, Replica or these relationship chatbots, a therapeutic chatbot could also send a reminder, an email, a notification. So the full spectrum of communication.
Absolutely. These agents can send reminders, and the reminders that you will get are going to be way more personalized than the ones that you get today. Let's say that you're a parent, right, and you have a child. If I send you, if you get a notification that says, "Hey, Mark, were you able to play with John today?" That's a more striking notification than just, "Hey, check in with Xbot."
Great. Anything else you would like to add?
I would like to say that I'm a very optimistic person in general, and I think that technology made us a better society, that people may be afraid of losing their jobs, of all the negative risks. I like to make the comparison with computers. We're in the Computer History Museum, right? Computers simplify our life. Computers improved so many outcomes in human society. I think that with AI, the same will happen.
And is there a particularly memorable experience or success story involving therapeutic chatbots? I think you gave one or two already.
The most memorable experience I had about success was the one of these two clients, two users, one mentioning, "Thank God that he put you on my way," talking about the bot. And another one was a teenager with autism that said, "God bless you, Taco." Taco was the name of the bot that my student developed. So that for me is kind of the highlight of my research experience with conversational agents. Whether the bots can understand us or not, it's a matter of interpretation. We all know that these are statistical tricks. It's just guessing which is the most likely word that comes next, right? Some people think that that is understanding. right? It's just a matter of interpretation. I think personally that we humans can understand each other, and that what the AI is simulates something that makes us think that they are understanding us. But they're not. They are just predicting what is the most likely next word. Whether you want to think it one way or the other one, you're right.
So then I guess that does bring up the question, though. Is it responsible to encourage clients to develop a relationship with something that's not really there?
As long as they are transparent that this is an AI, that this is not a human, it's our choice to relate or not. Some users do not want to relate or talk with other humans, and they actually prefer this option. So we need to have resources for everyone. There are other people that do not have much social connections, and these options are the ones that they can get in the moment of need. So that's valuable for them.
But is there, like with the relationship chatbots, there's some risk that they'll get used to a perfectly understanding, responsive counterpart that may be easier to relate to than humans? Is there a risk of becoming, that it's a crutch in a sense?
It's like when people were saying individuals would only use computers, right? We use computers a lot today, yes, right? We use computers even to connect with our loved ones, right? But we also get out and connect with others. I think that it's not one or the other one. I think that what will happen in the future is that we will all have a digital body, and we'll be able to consult with them with any questions that we have. And sometimes having an extra brain thinking what we need to do may give us more opportunities. If you are a more impulsive person and having the chance to say, hey, I want to punch this person, or having someone telling you, hey, maybe you want to get out of that situation and avoid getting into trouble, that's going to be very valuable for those individuals. So I think that it's our choice whether we want to connect with an AI or not. And we should not expect everyone to behave the same. What we need to do is what is best for each individual.
Does it require retraining therapists to use chatbots in their work?
Well, I think that we will need to do a lot of work in having therapists being enthusiastic about these tools, because most people tend to be resistant rather than enthusiastic. So if they learn how these tools are being developed, they can gain trust. If they can use it, even faking that they are clients, to see how they work, that would be a good way of actually learning the treatment sometimes. We're training students at our university in going through the treatment that is simulated with an AI, right? So that's a way richer experience than just reading a book. So at least it can complement reading the book, right?
But will they have to learn new techniques as therapists to effectively employ chatbots?
What I would say is they will need to learn how to decide which are the best treatment protocols, right? And how to supervise these tools. But today I need to memorize every single step of the treatment. And what happens is we humans, we cannot retain in our head more than 1 or 2 treatment protocols for mental health. So we end up doing something more loose. We drift away from the treatment protocols, we lose therapeutic power. So if I'm trained on using all these tools that are good at delivering treatment protocols, I would probably do a better job. So that's something definitely the newer generations of therapists will have to learn.
And last, do you have any, there's lots of conversations about AI ending the world, saving the world, all sorts of things. Do you have any reaction to those conversations?
You're talking to someone very optimistic, so I'm more on the side of saving the world, but of course it's not all or nothing. What will probably happen is that it will improve many aspects of our lives, and in some aspects we'll have to be careful, right? Computers have improved many aspects of our lives, but you can have also problems associated, so we'll need to reduce those risks.
So what's your personal estimate of the risk of AI leading to human extinction on a scale of 1 to 100?
On a scale from 1 to 100 is 0.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.